Welcome to Section 420, Talkin Yankees. Now, my next guest worked as a vendor at Yankee Stadium for 40 years, detailed in his book, My Life in Yankee Stadium. He's here to share the story behind the book, as well as some stories about his job at Yankee Stadium. Here he is, Stewart Zully. Hey, Stewart, thanks for joining us.
Hey, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
No problem. Now, you're an overall Renaissance man. I mean, you're a published author, you're an actor, you're a director, you're a producer.
Renaissance man. Whoa.
Whoa, I'm building up great here. And
I'm from the Bronx.
More importantly, yes, from the Bronx, but more importantly, you sold beer at Yankee Stadium for 40 years, as detailed in your book, My Life in Yankee Stadium. So, I always thought it's great to have, just the workers, the people that are there every day, just, tell, I feel you get the real story. So just give me a little background story of terms of the book, the idea of writing it, and maybe the process to get it actually published.
Right. Well, I started working in Yankee Stadium when I was 15 years old. I was at a game, and I walked past a what they call a station, and one guy that was working in there, who was what's called a checker, who'd keep track of when guys would take a box of peanuts or whatever. It was my English teacher, and I said to him, "Hey, can you get me a job here?" And he said, "Well, talk to me tomorrow after school." And so, long story short, he helped me forge my working papers to get into Yankee Stadium, because I was only 15. You had to be 16. And so he helped me do that with a friend of his, another teacher. And I actually started at the stadium selling hot chocolate for New York Giant football games. That's when the Giants played at the stadium. And then I went back the next year, and I was selling peanuts and Cracker Jacks, and I sold everything. I didn't really sell beer for the whole 40 years because you work yourself up. So I had hot dogs, I had soda, I had whatever they had. We sold this thing, Sundew orange drink. I don't know if you know Sundew, in little containers. We sometimes sold pizza. We sold egg rolls at the stadium. Vendors sold egg rolls. And but I did it for 40 years. I figured out that I worked over 2,500 events, which is kind of crazy. But everything from concerts to, I worked at a Muhammad Ali championship fight. I worked all the Red Sox Yankee games, World Series, and all of that. And I was able to put my stories together and put together this book, My Life in Yankee Stadium, 40 years as a vendor and other tales of growing up somewhat sane in the Bronx.
Now, obviously, growing up in the Bronx, I'm assuming you were a Yankee fan, following the team. So, in terms of like working for the Yankees, do you lose any of that fandom? Kind of like, because then it's more of a job. It's not really being a fan. Do you lose that, or it's just always a fan no matter what?
I gradually did lose that because, as you say, it was a job. I have a story in the book. We had to stop working at 9:30. Game started at 7 o'clock. I think then it started at 7:30. So we had to stop selling beer at 9:30. So there was a vendor there who worked at Shea Stadium for the Mets and Yankee Stadium for the Yankees. And I said to him, "So when the Mets play the Yankees now, when they were having those interleague games, who do you root for?" And he said he roots for 9:30. So basically, that's what it comes down to. It does become a job. But I still loved the Yankees because I loved individual players. Back in the day, I loved Thurman Munson. That was my guy. And I was a catcher in Little League. And so those teams in the late 70s, I really was connected to. They really were kind of more of a working class Bronx kind of a team, And then later on, the big money and all of that. And it changed a little bit, It's funny because because we've been starved for baseball, you must be dying, missing games. We all are. And I just rewatched the Ken Burns special, the 9-part special that Ken Burns did. And I just finished it this morning. And they talked about that back in the day, like Brooklyn Dodgers or whatever, the players were working class guys. They rode the subway, and all of that. And they felt that the fans were really connected to the players. And then the salaries escalated. And the next thing you knew, they were behind these stained windows coming to the game and really removed. A-Rod, you don't really feel like a total connection to A-Rod. I mean, he seems like a nice guy, but it's different than those guys that were, like I say, that were even Yogi Berra. He just seemed like a guy that was from down the street. He happens to be a ball player. So I think that sort of cut into it for me. But I love the game of baseball, and like I say, I loved individual players, Lou Piniella and Aaron Judge, still fantastic. Derek Jeter, Mariano Rivera, who I think arguably could be the greatest Yankee of them all.
I always say that, everyone always says Babe Ruth was, but, again, everyday player versus a bullpen person, but really technically in terms of specialty skill, being good at what he did, technically it's really Rivera if you think about it.
I think so. He changed the game so that if the Yankees were ahead after 8 innings, it was an 8-inning game. I mean, he was such money in the bank. But, of course, like you say, people think of Babe Ruth. My guy was Willie Mays. And as an all-around player, exciting player, I mean, but, I'm an old guy, so Willie Mays.
And in terms of, just talking about, how money changes things, and you probably saw this yourself, you were right there in the front row. I always felt the Yankees had the advantage in terms of the Bronx Zoo crowd. Obviously, it was it was rowdy in the late 90s, and it was probably nuts in the 70s and 80s, but I was obviously too young to remember that. But I feel especially with the, once they got the championships with Joe Torre in that year, and then especially moving to the new stadium, I think the Yankees kind of lost a little bit of that home field crowd. Okay, it's not okay to be fighting and throwing batteries at players and stuff, but you just saw a bit of the fans are a little more relaxed in that regard. You just don't have that rowdiness that you probably had with the late 70s Yankees, and those fans probably were insane. I mean, I wish I would have been able to experience that.
Well, do you remember 96 when they won 96?
Yeah, no, and I was there actually when they clinched it, and people were throwing beers off the top of the rafters and everything like that. And again, I'm not saying that stuff's okay, but I think it intimidates players because they're definitely Yankees definitely had, I think, a home field advantage of just the crowd being that jacked up, and I think an opposing pitcher would just get nervous and stuff. And I think the Yankees, over the years kind of lost that little edge. I think just from fans being more relaxed, and now the police don't play around. If you just mess up, if you even scream an obscenity, they just toss you right out of there.
Well, also that's partly like the new stadium. I worked a couple of years at the new stadium, but in the old stadium and in the original stadium, the fans were that much closer to the players, so they could hear you. Now I don't even know if they can hear you. If they can, it's just a few select people, like in the right field stands, they could get on the right fielder or whatever. But I think that's part of it. And, the new stadium, it's very corporate. And like you say, the security is right on top of you. Whereas even in the old stadium, you could sneak down to if you worked it right, you could sneak down and sit in the box seat. Now you can't.
Getting back to being a vendor, I mean, did you like the beer the most just because maybe that got you the best tips? Did you have a favorite kind of concession you like to sell?
Yeah, no, you sort of worked your way up to beer. But I also, for a couple of years, I sold souvenirs, and I had a souvenir stand. What happened was one time I didn't make the cut to sell beer. So one of the guys said, why don't you go over to the souvenir room? They need vendors. And this was before 96. So that's some lean years, Dave Winfield and back then. And so I ended up selling, the foam fingers, walking around the stands, all that sort of thing. And then eventually I ended up getting a stand. So I was there every day with my little store behind third base on the main level. And I did that for a couple of years. And that was kind of fun. It was a very different sort of vending experience. When you're selling beer, when you're selling hot dogs, you're moving as fast as you can. You make as much money by commission. So the quicker you move, the more you sell, the more money you make. When you have a souvenir stand, you are anchored to that stand. You can't move, obviously. So you hang out. And you basically, like I mentioned in the book, it's like you're a bartender. And people tell you stories and they say, you know, I grew up in Minnesota, but my father was from New York and he loved DiMaggio and blah, blah, blah. And they just want to share that story with me as I'm standing there. And I had nowhere to go. And I used to love hearing those stories, you know, or see these little kids, they'd come up and they'd spill like, you know, 50 pennies on the counter and say, what can I get? Anything.
I was probably one of those kids, maybe. Who knows?
It might have been you. Might have been you, James. Yeah. So, but to get back to your point, yeah, you sort of work your way up. And when you gain seniority, you get to choose your item in order of your seniority. So the number one guy, let's say, would take beer behind home plate, and then it would continue to shift. So I used to sell behind home plate or by first base or by third base after a while. You know, when I first was there, it was peanuts and hot chocolate on a big container on my back, and you'd pour the hot chocolate in the cold weather, spilling all over your pants. It was just, it was a mess. But it was fun. Those football games were so much fun. That was great. Yeah.
It's funny, like, yeah, a lot of, you know, maybe younger fans don't realize that the New York Giants actually played there for a number of years. And, you know, and probably the greatest game ever, as they say, took place in Yankee Stadium.
Right. That was before my time.
Yeah.
In 1958, the Colts and the Giants. Yeah. But that was a great energy, the New York Giant football games, because those tickets, you couldn't buy those tickets. You know, that was just passed down from family to family. It's like Green Bay Packer tickets, you know. And so those fans knew their whole section, grew up with them, were friends with them. Talk about that family feeling and that close-knit feeling that you'd have at the ballpark. That's what it was like in those football games. Even though the Giants weren't terribly good. I think the best year they had was 7-7 at that time with Fran Tarkenton. But I write about that in the book about it was amazing when they would kick an extra point, you could keep the football. Now they put up a netting, but you could keep the football. And that was pretty cool to get a football. You know, a baseball's nice, but a football. No. And so they would be fighting for that ball when they kicked that extra point. That was fun. And I sold beer there too. And I just was opening the can, pouring the can, just constant. That was amazing. So that was fun. That was fun. One of the first stories that I jotted down was when the Yankees won in '96. And I had a souvenir stand. And at the end of the game, I had to turn all my stock in because you don't turn in your stock each day. You just kind of give them an estimate, you count it up, and then you come back the next day. And then at the end of a homestand or at the end of a season, then you have to turn everything in and do all the books. So I had to do all the books. That was game 6 in '96. And so I'm leaving with a buddy of mine. It's 3:00 in the morning. The Yanks had won. I guess Wade Boggs had ridden around on the horse around the field. And we're heading back to the parking lot through the stadium. And I said, hey, let's go down there. And I went down a hallway. And the next thing I knew, we were in the dugout, the Yankee dugout. And the next thing I knew after that is we were running around the bases. The place was empty. I'm so scared we're going to get caught, of course. And that whole experience, I talk about that in the book too. That was the first story I wrote. So that was '96, a long time ago. And then, you know, you're in the locker room when you're in a place of business. People always say, boy, you can write a book about this place, you know? And I did. And so I would just sort of jot down things and odds and ends. And the book doesn't only cover the Yankees because I'm also an actor. And so within the book, I share stories about my career and instances, for instance, like I did a movie with Jack Nicholson, and I went to the premiere, downtown in New York. And then the next day, he came to the game. And he used to come to the game a lot. And so there I was chatting with him. I gave him a beer. I gave his girlfriend a beer. And I had that happen a lot. I bumped into Dustin Hoffman. I had an audition with him. So I was talking to him. And there were a number of players, basketball players and other actors that I would sort of bump into at the stadium, which was pretty cool. I had a part on The Sopranos, and then Gandolfini came to the game, and that was kind of cool to see him there and talk him up. I played his accountant in a couple of episodes on The Sopranos.
Cool.
And so it was interesting how my acting life and my vending life kind of intertwined. And so I try to cover that in the book as well. You know?
Now, in terms of like reception, I mean, did you get any blockage from like the Yankees front office from doing this book? I mean, or they just didn't care or just didn't respond about it?
No, I'm joking. But no, I didn't really deal with the Yankees because, you know, the Yankees are this big corporate giant, you know, and this is my personal life in Yankee Stadium. So it didn't really have to do necessarily with the Yankee empire, as it were. So, so I did it from a standpoint of this is my life, and it happened to be in Yankee Stadium. So I didn't deal with the Yankees, but in terms of reaching out to the public, I sent the book to a number of people, and actually got a great response from Larry King, who big baseball fan.
Oh yeah,
Dodger fan, you know, big Dodger fan. But he loved the book, so he gave me a beautiful blurb. I have it on the cover. You know, you will love this book, Larry King, and some others. You know, actually a guy that was the publicist for the Yankees back during the Billy Martin days. He was a publicist, Marty Appel. I don't know if you know him, but he loved the book. And so if you wanted to get an interview with Reggie Jackson, he was the guy you had to go through. So so he appreciated the book because it's kind of, you know, the nuts and bolts of Yankee Stadium and being in the ballpark. I say it's like sort of being in the basement of the stadium, you know, and getting that feel of it.
and like looking back, maybe was there a story that you wish you did add, you didn't, or was maybe something you said you wish? I mean, is any kind of you look back, you know, 2020, you know, hindsight's 2020, but is there something you wish you would have added or maybe done differently, you know, as you were producing the book?
It's funny you say that because there was one. Do you remember Rick Cerrone?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So he almost came out off the field to fight with me. Yeah, because I was giving him the business. You know, I was a big Yankee fan then. I was saying, you can't hit, you can't run, you can't field. And they were holding him back. Dick Hauser, I think, was there, and somebody. I mean, I think he was semi-joking. He wasn't going to come into the stands and have a fight with a vendor, but I was getting to him. But I didn't put that into the book. I used to, you know, as a vendor, you had to get to the stadium early, a couple of hours before the fans came in. And I used to jog in the upper deck. Very therapeutic and fun to be in the upper deck during batting practice or whatever. So I'd run from foul pole to foul pole. And I remember one time Catfish Hunter tried to hit me with a baseball. He threw a baseball up there. So I think he was just like a little target practice for Catfish, who was a great, great pitcher. I mean, that guy was like, it reminded me a little bit, or David Cohn reminded me of Catfish in terms of that real grittiness on the mound. You know, you knew you were going to get a good effort from Catfish Hunter and David Cohn.
Yeah, I actually heard that analogy before. They always said that they were similar, but I heard maybe Cohen had a little more velocity, but like the same bulldog mentality.
Same bulldog mentality, like a Jack Morris, you know, those guys that just were really, yeah, bulldog mentality is a great way to describe it. Yeah, I used to enjoy watching those guys. That's what I mean. Like those blue collar kind of tough, gritty guys were the guys that I tended to gravitate towards on the Yankees. Not the Reggie Jacksons necessarily, a little showboating. That's why I like Thurman. I mean, he left it all on the field. When I had that Yankee schedule, that my life revolved around the Yankee schedule. I would tell my friends, if the Yankees are in town, I'm in town. And what was cool about it is I would work 9, 10 days in a row, make my money, and then I'd be off for 9 or 10 days. And then I could go away and go upstate or wherever I was going to go. And then, of course, when they got to the World Series, so I would be here through October. And then I would go out to LA. So I was in LA, let's say, from November through March or April. And that was fun. And I managed to be able to pull that off, because it's not easy to do that, keep your apartment, get an apartment for a couple of months, But after a while, I was able to figure it out. And then the past few years, I was working on getting the book together, I never wrote a book before. And it's like I told friends of mine, it was like writing 60 book reports. I mean, just checking, all the grammar and everything else and putting it together, and getting the rights to certain photos and things like that, and having some interviews in there. And so I worked on that, but it took a while, because, you get the energy to do it, and then you slip back, and then you keep going or whatever. But I ended up self-publishing it. So it's on like Amazon, Barnes and Noble. It's even in the Baseball Hall of Fame bookstore. And then on my own website, StewartJZully.com. And that's okay. Self-publishing is okay because you're in charge of it. It's just like with your show, you don't have to answer to anybody. We're going to do this or we're going to do that. So there's a great freedom to that, and you call all the shots. You're the CEO, you're the director, you're the writer, producer, and that's how it was for me with the book. So I decided on, the picture or whatever, because some people who have publishers, they make those decisions for them, and suddenly it's not your book anymore. Do you know what I mean? So,
gotcha.
Yeah.
And in terms of once the book was out there, I mean, did anyone come up to you, any surprises, people maybe that you didn't think would contact you and was like, wow, this is a great job? Or, I mean, was there any surprises after the book was floating around out there?
Well, I had a publicist for a couple of months, so I did, and I'm still doing a series of, interviews. This is the first one this way that I'm doing, but I actually went to New York, I guess it was last summer, and I had a TV spot on Bronx 12, and they did a nice TV spot on me coming back to the stadium and seeing some of the vendors. So it was nice. I probably did about 20 interviews at different radio stations around the country. And because they're Yankee fans, everywhere. I'll bet you hear from people who are in, Montana or someplace, and ex-New Yorkers, and they love their Yankees.
Yeah, it's funny. 2 weeks in a row, you're in California. Last week, gentleman, also from California, lived in the city for many years, but he moved out to California, but he's kind of in an area with other Yankee fans. He always finds himself, almost like wanting to talk Yankees. So he just actually launched his own podcast. So, like you said, we're all over the place.
All over the place. I know. It's so funny. And even you see pictures. I went to London last summer, and you see so many people wearing Yankee hats, even outside the country. I mean, that NY is everywhere, which is great. It's great.
Yeah, I think probably, internationally, half the people don't even know what it is, but it's just the symbols is so powerful.
Right.
And anyone connected or someone like yourself that has some sort of, vine to that. And yeah, I mean, you've been around again, like I said, the Pope, Muhammad Ali, so all those championships over the years. So yeah, I mean, you're like a walking piece of history. I'm just, very honored to have you on. Now, let's get back into the beer vending business. I mean, was there any great a customer experience that just gave you a $300 tip or any sort of crazy story like that?
Uh, I think the biggest tip I got was $20. Sometimes back in the old stadium, you didn't have the regulation of just 2 beers per person. You know, that came along later as the fans got rowdier and security got tighter. So I would have either a case of beer where I'd pour the beers, or we'd have them in cups. That was way back, and we had about 24 in a rack, and it had like a little plastic foam on top, a seal on it, and that's how you sold the beer. So sometimes offices would buy out a certain section, and have an evening at the stadium, and they would buy a whole case or a whole tray of beer from me, and then even say, "Come back and bring us more." So I'd sell 48 beers, boom, like that. Whereas in a normal game, that might take 2 innings. And so that's what those were great. They loved me. They were boisterous. They were, those. I miss those sorts of fans and events when it was just a lot of fun. I mean, that was the thing about working at the stadium. People are there to have a good time, and people are high-fiving people, strangers next to them. Jeter gets a double, and everybody's going crazy, and they're there to just enjoy themselves. And I was kind of part of that, which I loved. That's why I love being there. I love doing that about selling beer, because hey, it's a good time. Good time. That's why we miss it so much now.
Okay.
I mean, we really do.
Right, that's a good point. Just like, I know I find myself, like, I don't like talking to people, but when I'm in the stands and like there's a big home run or something, I find myself high-fiving strangers, and I would never do
Sure.
that. And I
Right.
think it's that rush, and we're all just missing that right now.
Right. And, and there was no tension between people. There was no things about race or anything about, status. You'd see a mailman there, a guy in a UPS uniform, and he'd be high-fiving some businessman in a suit. Do you know what I mean? It's because they had that commonality of the Yankees. And we got a rally going. Come on, let's do it. So that sense of community, in a sense, is unfortunately, it's going to be back. It's going to be back, but it'll probably take a little while.
Definitely. Well, Stewart, I appreciate you joining us. Now, people can follow you on Twitter. You have your website. And again, My Life in Yankee Stadium. The book is available on Amazon, on Barnes & Noble. And, any sort of party message, anything you want to say to your Bronx friends?
What are you talking about?
Oh, you got to do me a favor. You got to give me your beer man call.
Hip it, cold beer.
I'll buy one.